Mr. President, if I may.
Yes.
Mr. President, I'm going to ask to invoke Rule 15 of Council Rules, which is a division of question, and at the appropriate time, I'd like to speak to that matter.
Well, with that, first of all, it does not need to be a vote with regards to that as I read the rule. Attorney Zellers?
That's correct.
All right, well then I would say now would be the appropriate time. Chair will recognize you.
Thank you, Mr. President. The question of medical marijuana has been bandied about in the city for about 3 months, but I would just like to emphasize that we're only here discussing an ordinance based upon a statute that was passed by the Ohio House, the Ohio Senate, the governor, with the aid and the input of the Ohio State Medical Association, Ohio State Nurses Association, the Ohio State Hospital Association. After a 2-year process, a statute was passed last September. The point of the statute was that the medical field has indicated to the political field that there are approximately 21 serious illnesses from which people are not only ill but dying from, such as cancer, Crohn's disease, and schizophrenia, and we can go through the whole list of all the medical issues that the medical field has indicated may be some relief to some individuals. The concern, obviously, by the populace at large has put the legislature in a position that they're trying to be very protective. One is they have specifically stated that if you are an employer and you have a drug-free workplace, if in fact you use medical marijuana as recommended by your physician and you're tested for it, you have violated the rules and you may be fired, and there is no appeal from that firing. So the employers have certainly pointed out, and rightfully so, that you're looking at equipment, etc., that it might not be correct to use medical marijuana, even if it's only even if it's only 1/3 full strength. If you want the full marijuana high, all you have to do is ask some of the teenagers in Columbiana County where to buy it, and they'll be happy to help you with that. But what we have is 21 separate diseases. And out of all this conversation we've had for the last 3 months, I've only had 9 people personally contact me to talk about the subject matter. 8 of the 9 are folks that indicate that they may have a medical reason to use it. And their concern is that one of the stringent issues of the statute says that only the patient may purchase the medical marijuana. Your spouse can't get it for you. Your aid worker can't get it for you. Your visiting nurse can't get it for you. Only the patient can have a card that would allow the purchase of the oil or the patch to allow this. So the issue is how do they get it? And this has been the discussion that has been brought to the forefront to me, is that yes, they could drive to Alliance, they can drive to Warren, they can drive to Akron, they can drive to East Liverpool, they can drive to East Palestine, they can drive to Youngstown, all of which are allowing medical marijuana to be purchased in those locations. The issue is, though, we have before us a question as to whether or not we're going to require the sick, elderly, dying in this town to physically get in a car and go get it, because they're the only ones that can. Now that's a big distinction between the decisions already made by this council. This ordinance specifically says we have prohibited growth of medical marijuana within the city limits. This ordinance came out of Council of the Whole 7-0 that says we will not allow it to be produced. The distinction is whether or not we're going to allow, and there is an ordinance limiting the number of dispensaries to 2. But my interpretation of Rule 15 says that on demand of any member of council, a question under consideration which covers 2 or more points shall be divided. And I believe we have 3 prohibitions in this ordinance, and I believe we can vote on each of the individual prohibitions. And the one advantage is if at any time in the future we come back to take a look at one of the prohibitions, for example, that have been voted on, we are allowed to come back and take a look at that particular question and not have to go through the whole process of vacating an ordinance and starting all over again. So I am requesting under Rule 15 that we take a vote in the ordinance that is present and we take a deliberate vote on each of the 3 prohibitions that set forth in the ordinance.
And I believe you're correct in what you're asking for with regards to that. And originally, just to kind of give some background, there were the first ordinance that dealt with the cultivation and processing, and then a second one that dealt with dispensing. There was an amendment made to Ordinance 36, which dealt with the cultivation and processing, to add dispensing within that, which basically made the other ordinance at the time moot. So that's where we're at today, and as to your calling for the separate vote on each one of those. So we will have the clerk, we'll start off with the first one, move to the second, and then go to the third and take a vote with regards to each of those then on this. So you had your hand up. So with this, Madam Clerk, if you would please read Ordinance 36 as dealing with cultivation only at this time for its 3rd reading this evening.
Being an ordinance creating and adopting Chapter 514 of Part 5 of the Codified Ordinances of the City of Salem for the purpose of prohibiting medical marijuana cultivation within the City of Salem.
Is there any discussion?
So yes would be that we are voting not to allow, to
Correct.
prohibit. Okay, thank you.
Any further discussion or questions?
I have one question. Is there anywhere in the city of Salem now that's zoned to permit either cultivation or processing?
I don't know if Attorney Zellers knows the answer. I don't know the answer to that off the top of my head.
Thank you, Mr. President. Not specifically, Mrs. Dickey. And as you know, our current code is inclusive, not exclusive. So if it doesn't allow it specifically, if it doesn't already say that they're allowed to do it, then they are not allowed to do it.
So do we really need to vote on that? Since we don't have any place zoned to allow that?
I guess the reason that perhaps it was discussed to put it in place, if you recall, we had a gentleman that was interested in cultivation and potentially processing. There was some machinations around that regarding our current ordinance and some of the language that's there, compounding pharmaceuticals, things of that nature. Did it qualify? Did it not qualify? So I think this was an effort to just simply put that all to rest and say it is or is not permitted.
Any other questions or discussion? Seeing none, then Madam Clerk, will you please call the roll on ordinance number 36 as to the cultivation question for passage this evening?
Mr. Whitehill?
Yes.
Mr. Paparotis?
Yes.
Mr. Knoll?
Yes.
Mrs. Mancuso?
Yes.
Mr. Gall?
Yes.
Mrs. Dickey?
Yes.
Okay. Passes with 6 yeas. I'm just going to step in here. Mr. Whitehill, move on. Madam Clerk, would you please read ordinance number 36 for its 3rd reading as to the issue of processing?
Being an ordinance creating and adopting Chapter 514 of Part 5 of the Codified Ordinances of the City of Salem for the purpose of prohibiting medical marijuana processing within the City of Salem.
Right. Is there any discussion or questions with regards to that? Seeing none, Madam Clerk, will you please call the roll on ordinance number 36 as to the processing issue?
Mr. Whitehill?
Yes.
Mr. Paparotis?
Yes.
Mr. Knoll?
Yes.
Mrs. Mancuso?
Yes.
Mr. Gall?
Yes?
Mrs. Dickey?
Yes.
Passes 6-0. Madam Clerk, would you please read ordinance number 36 for its third reading with regards to the dispensing portion of this?
Being an ordinance creating and adopting Chapter 514 of Part 5 of the Codified Ordinances of the City of Salem for the purpose of prohibiting medical marijuana dispensing within the City of Salem.
Is there any discussion? Mrs. Dickey.
I just want to say that as a nurse, I've said before, I have a hard time telling a patient who has glaucoma, who has seizures, who has cancer, who has pain that is not relieved by other means, and those types of diagnoses, which are the 21 that we are talking about, that they have to drive some distance personally or have someone take them to obtain the prescription that they need. This is a prescription that is an alternative to other medications that are available that in some cases are highly addictive, highly abused, are targets for people to steal from them, which we see in the paper all the time, people stealing their medications, especially opioids, cocaine derivatives, things of that sort. I think that we would be denying our citizens that right to have an alternative medication that is recommended by their physician for that purpose in a limited quantity by their card that they would carry. They can't get a huge amount, and would really be a benefit to them. I also think that as far as the studies about it being a drug that leads to worse drugs, I think that that study has been flawed. If you ask an addict, did you ever use marijuana? And they say yes. That does not mean that that was a gateway drug to that use. If you ask that same addict, did they ever drink alcohol? Did they ever watch television? Did they ever smoke a cigarette? Did they ever do anything that their parents told them not to do? Then you would have to consider all those things a gateway drug. To have a true study to show that it's a gateway drug, you would have to have a sampling that was equal of both people who were addicted and not addicted. And I will tell you that having graduated from high school in 1976, if you took every person in my graduating class who ever smoked marijuana and asked them if they're a drug addict or proved whether or not they were a drug addict today, I think that the numbers would be minuscule. I think even the number of those that still smoke marijuana today would be very small. So I think that that study is very flawed. I also think that after studying the way that it has been legislated, that there is the Department of Commerce that has been set up and trained now to regulate this, and they are people regulating only in our state, or the Federal Drug Administration, who takes care of the regulation of opioids, is for the entire United States. So it is a more concentrated sampling of people who will be coming around and watching that this is done properly, especially in the very beginning and infancy of this business. It is also not a cheap business to get into. To get a license is very expensive, and there's a lot of hoops to go through, so not just anybody is going to be doing this. Also, the law does not allow people to smoke marijuana. These are going to be products that are derived from the marijuana itself. This is not people, everybody that's afraid of this has told me the thing they're afraid of is people are going to be sitting on their front porches smoking pot. And that is not what is allowed by law. What is allowed by law is a derivative that is very controlled and regulated for the purpose that, for medicinal purposes. This is also not recreational marijuana. Everybody's afraid, oh, this is going to lead to recreational marijuana. I believe that the way the state has regulated the medical marijuana law, that when or if they consider doing the recreational, that it will also be very well legislated and spelled out, and we will have probably the opportunity to do the same thing we're doing now and consider it city by city. That's what I believe from the leanings of the legislation at this time in the state of Ohio. So I would just ask you to really think in your heart about the people who are ill around you that you know. Or what is the better alternative? To let them have a marijuana derivative, a marijuana-based medication that is not habit-forming, or to make them rely on opioids and other medications that are much more harmful to their body as far as the studies know at this time. Thank you.
Let's start with Mr. Paparotis.
Since we're doing a recap, I guess, and it seems like we're rehashing an old conversation, just to bring up a couple of points. Marijuana law in the state of Ohio did make way for the use of marijuana at a 25% strength. However, 4 times that dose is 100% strength. 50% is 50% of that. Same buzz. Half of the diseases that they're talking about that derive a benefit from medical marijuana doesn't need any THC to make it better. The epilepsy doesn't need the THC to cure it. There's other ingredients in the marijuana that make that possible. And the person that has cancer still has to get in the car and go to the doctor. So they're in the car regardless. They have to go to Alliance. Maybe they just have to go to Salem, or they have to go 10 more miles to get to the doctor or to the hospital. But I think we're bringing up an old conversation all over again. And I think we're back to where we started. Thank you.
Mr. Whitehill.
Thank you, Mr. President. I think it was well put, Mrs. Dickey, as far as the concern. I can speak for me personally. I can't speak for others in the group, but the empathy that I feel towards those patients is what made this decision very difficult for me. I would also concur that many of these appointments are out of town. How often do you hear people say they're going to the Cleveland Clinic or they're going to, locations outside the city? Not that we don't have good oncology local, but the reality is that for many of these treatments, even my own, I went to Canton for mine, so the concept that these people are absolutely unable to travel to get their medicine, I think is false. I think it's maybe less convenient, but it is possible. The Department of Commerce regulating this is actually what gives me concern. The lack of experience, the fact that this program is not established yet to see what the successes or what the failures are. I said in our meeting, I prefer to wait and see how that goes, quite frankly. Does it go the way the legislators intended it to? Let's be honest, we're in the middle of a federal situation right now because the plan didn't go the way the legislators wanted it to. So it can happen within our state, and I think that we need time to see how that works. And so that, for me, is kind of all I have as far as from my personal perspective. But I don't want there to be this narrative that there's a lack of empathy for the patients that need it. That's simply not the case with me, at least.
Any further discussion or comment? All right, seeing none, Madam Clerk, will you please call the roll on ordinance number 36, dealing with that section as to dispensing.
Mr. Whitehill?
Yes.
Mr. Paparotis?
Yes.
Mr. Knoll?
Yes.
Mrs. Mancuso?
Yes.
Mr. Gall?
No.
Mrs. Dickey?
No.